The best method bases a lot of what we do on teaching people to undo the seated position. We live in a society where you can get through most of your day in a seated position. We tend to wake up in the morning, get ready for our day, sit, and then we get in our car, we drive, we commute to work. Then we sit at a desk all day long, maybe getting up to go to the bathroom from time to time. Then we drive home, or we drive to the gym and we do a spin class, or we go for a bike ride, seated position again. Then we go home, we eat dinner, sit down, watch TV, check our email, and then we go to bed. Oftentimes we end up sleeping in a fetal position, which again is pretty much a seated position. We're bending the skeleton in half. So that fetal position, that seated position, becomes a position that we are maintained throughout our entire lifetime, or a majority of our lifetime. So that's obviously the extreme case of a seated person in our society. Now, don't get me wrong, there are people that stand up throughout the day to work, but again, the 30-minute commute, the sitting down to check your emails. If you can find somebody that doesn't sit for less than an hour, for a majority of their day, I'd be very surprised. So even if you sit an hour a day, I mean, that's an hour a day where you are putting your skeleton in a flexed position. Now, what does this flexed skeleton position do to our body, or to our muscle that's in our skeleton? The muscles in the back of the body tend to become the weakest link in this position, i.e. the gluteus maximus specifically becomes lengthened out. When you bring your knee to your chest, you are elongating the gluteus maximus. Now, this would be fine if we were standing all day long and we wanted to stretch our glutes by pulling our knee to our chest. But because we sit all day, we don't need to stretch that muscle out anymore, because the seated position is a stretch on our gluteus maximus. You're taking the point of origination for the muscle and elongating the attachment site of that muscle, i.e. the femur is pulling away from the pelvis and stretching out the muscle. I like to use the example of the gluteus medius, the muscles in the body as rubber bands. If you take a rubber band and stretch it for an hour a day, or if you stretch it for 8 hours a day, what are you doing to that rubber band? You're decreasing its ability to return to its original position. So gluteus maximus, the butt muscle, we tend to stretch out just like a rubber band all day long. This is very precarious in that it causes so much disruption on our entire skeleton. The gluteus maximus is the only muscle in the body that has the term maximus behind it. One of the rationales for that is because it's one of the strongest muscles in the body. So if you take one of the strongest muscles in the body and tell it to stretch out all day long, it's going to have very severe effects on your posture, on your body's position that you hold throughout the day. So this leads to all kinds of disruptive problems, or disruptive patterns that cause aches and pains and problems in our joints and our body. Low back pain. If you find somebody that has not had low back pain in their life, or I'd be surprised. We all tend to have some issue at some point during our lifetime with the low back. A lot of my clients come in for their first assessment with low back pain. One of the first things I teach them to do is strengthen the gluteus maximus, because if the strongest muscle in the body is not stabilizing the pelvis, the spine is not going to have any stability as well. So the little muscles that erect the spine have no chance to do their job if their anchor muscle, the glute max, is not working. So it's very important with our best method to teach people the importance of the gluteus maximus and the muscles of the back of the body in general. Because of our seated society that we find ourselves in, there's a lot of emphasis in the function in today's fitness industry and physical therapy to do this functional training, i.e. moving like a natural human should move, and teaching people how to do proper squats and lunges and functional movements are great, and they're really helping people to understand the complexity of the muscles in the body and how they are supposed to keep us moving naturally, twisting and lunging and standing and walking and turning and pulling and pushing, but without the emphasis on the gluteus maximus contraction and strengthening and neuromuscular reeducation, you're always going to be deficient in your movement patterns. Because again, when you leave your functional training session or whatever fitness program or whatever physical therapy you're doing, you're going to go sit again. This cycle never ends throughout our whole lifetime. We always undo our posture by sitting. So, moral of the story, we have to find ways to teach people how to utilize those butt muscles all day long, not just when you work out, not just when you're doing therapy, but whenever you go to sit down in your car, whenever you go to sit down at your job, you need to start utilizing these muscles. And how do we do that? You can't just get up and do squats all the time. The one thing I really emphasize to my new clients is the awareness of the muscle, the constant squeezing of the muscle, the engagement of the muscle. Squeezing your butt cheeks together is great. Just clenching your butt tight like you're squeezing a quarter in between your butt cheeks. I know it's a great visualization, but it works for a lot of people. Now this clenching of the butt cheeks or the glutes while we're in a seated position, it's reminding our brain that those muscles are there. The brain tends to shut down those muscles when we're sitting just because they're not necessary for that activity. So anytime your brain can shut down muscles, it's going to, because if it's a muscle that burns a lot of calories, your brain wants to save calories. That's your brain's job, to utilize the calories that we give it and keep us alive for as long as possible. If there's a metabolically active tissue that burns a lot of calories, if it's not necessary for that activity that we're doing, your brain's going to shut it down. So we've got that neurological disengagement of the muscle. We've got the stretching of the muscle when we sit. You have to find ways to undo those patterns. And going back to the clenching of the butt cheeks, squeezing the butt all the time. Bringing your awareness to the glutes when you're sitting, when you're standing, when you're working out. It's huge. It's imperative. If you don't teach somebody that, they're always going to be at risk of hurting themselves. There needs to be a shift towards strengthening the back of the body, neuromuscularly recruiting those muscles more and more and more and more in order to change the posture. It all goes back to posture, the correct anatomical alignment. How are you undoing that correct anatomical alignment throughout your day? And what are the best ways that you can get that natural erect position back as quickly and as safely as possible? And a great way to start is by finding the strongest muscle in the body and using it more and more and more and more and more and more and more, and repetition of the contraction of the muscle over and over and over and over. I can't reiterate it enough, because every day you're undoing it by sitting. You're constantly teaching it not to work. So you have to start finding ways to teach those muscles to work again. Otherwise, like I said before, you're going to constantly be going back to undoing it. So, moral of the story, one of the major foundational components of the best method is teaching the client, the patient, to use muscles that they're not using anymore from their everyday positions. Gluteus maximus, number one. Now, there are all kinds of other things that we need to do to correct posture, but that's one of the easiest. If I had to choose one thing, squeeze your butt. It's number one, because when you leave a session with myself or one of my trainers, you can still utilize that. You can get into your car after our session and squeeze your butt for the 30-minute ride home, and then when you get home, you can squeeze your butt while you're checking your emails. It's hard at first. If you try to squeeze your butt for 10 seconds, it's really hard. But you can do it for 10 seconds today, 20 seconds tomorrow, and in a few weeks you're doing it for an hour, 2 hours. And eventually your awareness and your ability to contract that muscle is going to be second nature. That's what it needs to be, is second nature. You need to feel your right butt cheek squeezing. You need to know the difference between the left and the right butt cheek. Most people just clench together. They don't even differentiate the two. They're just really, really strong muscles that affect our body. You have to find ways to learn how to use them more and more and more. Pete, one of our other trainers, uses the analogy of your bicep muscle. When you lift an object, you know what your bicep is doing. When you bend your arm, you have awareness of that muscle. You know what it's capable of. You've been using it every day for your entire lifetime to lift objects. We just have a lot of neurological connections to our bicep muscle. We don't have those connections with our butt. If you ask somebody to squeeze their left butt cheek, most people can do it, but you have to think about it before you engage it. To be able to squeeze your muscles and to be able to control them, to be able to control and squeeze and utilize your butt muscles like you can your bicep takes a little time and practice, but that's your ultimate goal. Being able to control the muscle groups that you have no control of right now. That's one of the major goals, or one of the goals of neuromuscular reeducation, is using the muscle more and more and more so that you become efficient at using it, so that eventually it becomes a habit to utilize the muscles of the butt, just like your bicep muscles. So that's a great analogy to try to teach somebody how to use their butt. Just use it, practice. It's like riding a bike. Once you learn how to ride a bike, you can do it. So you have to teach your butt how to recruit. Sorry, that was a bad analogy, riding the bike thing, because you're sitting. But yeah, going back, just use the butt muscles more and more and more and more. That we put so much emphasis on it here, as I said, and it's the number one thing that you can do to help with so many issues in your body. And I'll elaborate on some of these other issues and how we can address them with more specific exercises as we go on. Thank you very much, and have your best day ever.